Mara sits alone in her dim dorm room, the soft hum of her laptop louder tonight than any comfort it once offered. The lie has already started to crack. She feels it in the way Elias's latest message trembles with too perfect calm, in the way her own breath stutters as she rereads his promise that everything will make sense soon. Rain taps against the window like it's trying to warn her, but she keeps staring at the glowing chat box where his name sits like a dare. Hours ago, Professor Kessler hesitated when he saw that name in her notes, his eyes sharpening before he smoothed his expression. She felt exposed, as if the world briefly saw the secret she had been protecting. Now, in the blue glow, her heart beats unevenly. A question drifts through her mind like a whisper she's afraid to hear. Could you spot a lie wearing a perfect smile? She scrolls upward, looking for comfort in old messages, but the cracks widen, pulling her into a silence she can't outrun. Mara lies on her narrow bed, phone glowing inches from her face as she rereads the message that started the unraveling. Elias had typed with that familiar poetic calm, telling her that some truths are too delicate to reveal all at once. The words curl inside her like smoke, beautiful until they choke. She tries to convince herself she's overthinking, but denial feels heavier tonight. The rain hasn't stopped, and its rhythm echoes the hesitation she refuses to admit. She scrolls back to the first night they talked, remembering how warm it felt to be seen. Now every memory feels slightly altered, as if someone adjusted the color and left it too cold. She thinks of Kessler's tightened expression, the way his voice softened when he asked if everything was all right. Mara clings to the idea that love can't be a trick. Yet a quiet dread pools beneath her ribs. Another question rises, uninvited. Would you trust someone you've never met? The next morning, Mara walks across campus with her headphones in but no music playing. She replays yesterday's moment with Kessler, trying to convince herself his reaction meant nothing. The air smells of wet pavement, and puddles reflect the sky in ways that feel unsettling, like mirrors waiting to expose something. Her phone buzzes with a new message from Elias, and her chest tightens before she even reads it. His words are tender again, almost apologetic, as if he sensed her slipping into doubt. She wants to believe him, to anchor herself in the warmth he always offers. But a crack once opened never fully closes. She steps under a tree, scrolling through old screenshots, noticing inconsistencies she once brushed aside. The weight of choosing between intuition and devotion sits heavy on her shoulders. She whispers to herself, barely audible, wondering if love is meant to feel like walking through fog. Inside the library, Mara sits between tall shelves, pretending to study while her mind drifts toward Elias again. The silence feels heavier here, broken only by distant footsteps. She opens a book, but sees his messages instead, the lines where he spoke about destiny and connection. They once felt poetic. Now, they echo with uncertainty. She notices the slight shifts in his stories, details she ignored because she wanted the comfort he offered. A deep ache settles in her chest as she realizes how easily longing can turn into blindness. She glances around, hoping no one can see the storm behind her eyes. For the first time, she wonders whether she's holding onto a person or an illusion. The thought chills her more than the cold air drifting from the vents above. As dusk falls, Mara sits on a bench outside, watching the sky fade into a bruised purple. She clutches her phone, the screen dark, afraid to open it again. The world feels suspended, waiting for her to decide what she believes. She thinks about the version of Elias she fell for, the voice notes filled with tenderness, the late-night confessions, the feeling of being understood without having to explain. But shadows lengthen inside those memories now, revealing corners she never noticed. She closes her eyes, breathing slowly, trying to separate truth from desire. In the quiet, another question surfaces, sharp enough to sting. What if your soulmate was a screenshot? The thought lingers as the wind chills her skin. reminding her that the world offline still exists, waiting for her to return. Mara sits at a corner table in the cafeteria, untouched food cooling beside her as she scrolls through the earliest messages Elias ever sent. They feel different now, too polished, too perfectly aligned with what she needed in that moment. She remembers how she poured her fears into those first conversations, how he responded with uncanny tenderness, echoing her words back with almost mirror-like precision. A warmth once lived in those memories, but now she senses calculation beneath every line. She pauses when she reaches a message she once read 100 times. Tonight, it feels rehearsed. Outside the window, clouds gather like they know something she doesn't. Her phone buzzes with a new message from Elias, the tone unusually urgent. She tries to swallow the rising panic, telling herself love shouldn't feel like a tightening rope. Her reflection on the dark screen stares back, asking a question she isn't ready to answer. Later that night, Mara rereads the first voice note Elias ever sent. His tone sounds warm and steady, but there's a distant quality she never noticed before, as if the words sit on a script he practiced. She lies back on her bed, letting his voice echo through the room, hoping it might restore the comfort she once felt. Instead, each sentence drips with new meaning, shaped by the doubt growing inside her. She lifts the phone closer, listening for imperfections, something unmistakably human, something real. But the smooth cadence feels too controlled. A chill spreads through her as she wonders how much of him she ever truly heard. She thinks of Kessler's warning glances, the weight behind them, and suddenly the silence after the voice note ends feels heavier than the message itself. She presses her palms to her eyes, wishing she could unhear the truth forming in her chest. The next day, Mara meets with Professor Kessler under the pretense of discussing her essay draft, though both sense the real reason hangs unspoken between them. Kessler studies her carefully, his calm presence grounding the storm within her. She waits for him to bring up the name again, but he doesn't. Instead, he asks how she's been sleeping. The simplicity of the question cracks something open, and she struggles to answer. She wants to protect Elias, or maybe protect the version of herself who believed in him. Kessler nods slowly, as if he already understands the turmoil she can't voice. He doesn't push, yet his patience presses against her walls, urging them to fall. When she finally mentions the inconsistencies she's noticed, his expression tightens, not with surprise but recognition. Her breath catches, because the truth she's been avoiding now sits between them, impossible to ignore. After leaving Kessler's office, Mara wanders across campus, her thoughts unraveling into fragmented realizations. Every contradiction she once ignored surfaces with new sharpness. Duplicated phrases, timeline gaps, stories that shifted by a detail or two depending on the day. She replays conversations she once treasured, only to find shadows in places she thought were warm. The wind cuts across the lawn, carrying dried leaves that skitter like warnings at her feet. She stops by the sculpture garden, staring at her dim phone screen, debating whether to confront Elias or keep pretending nothing has changed. The world feels split in two, the version where she believes him, and the version where she finally listens to her own instincts. The space between those worlds tightens around her chest, making every breath feel like a choice she doesn't know how to make. That night, Mara sits at her desk and opens a blank document, deciding to list every detail Elias ever shared. Names, dates, memories, family stories, places he claimed to have lived. The list grows fast, but its pattern chills her. Each detail feels slightly off, like pieces from different puzzles, forced together. She cross-checks small things she never cared to question. Whether on dates he described, landmarks he claimed were near his home, even phrases he repeated. The inconsistencies scream now. Her hands shake, not from the discoveries, but from the realization that she ignored her instincts for so long. She leans back, staring at the screen as the truth settles like a weight across her shoulders. The world feels too quiet, too still, as if waiting for her to make the first move. and for the first time she wonders whether Elias senses her slipping away. Mara wakes before sunrise, the sky still bruised with the last traces of night. She sits at her desk, staring at the document she created, the list that exposes every contradiction she once smoothed over. The silence presses on her, thick with the weight of the truth she can no longer deny. She opens Elias's chat, scrolling slowly, noticing how his tone shifts depending on her mood, always matching, always echoing. It once felt like connection. Now it feels like surveillance wrapped in affection. Her breath shakes as she spots a message she overlooked, one where he mentioned a memory tied to a place she now knows doesn't exist. The lie stands out like a stain. A single thought rises, sharp and painful. She has been building her heart on disappearing ground. She closes her eyes, letting the truth wash over her. Fear mixes with grief, but beneath both, a strange clarity begins to form. Later that morning, Mara walks across campus with her headphones hanging loose around her neck, listening to the hum of life around her, as if she's seeing the world without the filter she once lived behind. Students laugh, footsteps echo, and everything feels painfully real compared to the digital haze she's been drifting in. Her phone buzzes with a message from Elias, short, strangely clipped, asking if she's still with him. The phrasing shakes her, cold and possessive in a way she hasn't heard before. She stops near the fountain, staring at the message as the water splashes behind her like static. She types a response, deletes it, tries again, but nothing feels safe. For the first time, she imagines what Elias might be, without the soft words, without the borrowed photos. The thought makes her skin tight. She pockets her phone, unable to shake the feeling that he's watching even from a world he refuses to reveal. That afternoon, Mara seeks refuge in the library again, choosing the farthest table from the windows. She opens Elias's messages one more time, forcing herself to confront the patterns she once mistook for intimacy. His words mimic her feelings too precisely, like he was tracing her emotional outline rather than truly understanding it. She scrolls through screenshots, noticing recycled compliments, stories that tilt each time he retells them. Metaphors that repeat across weeks as though copied from a script. A heavy ache lodges in her chest, but this time it feels less like heartbreak and more like awakening. She sets her phone down and presses her palms to the table, grounding herself in something real: wood, texture, silence. She whispers, almost in defiance, that she deserves connection built on honesty, not performance. The admission is small but powerful, a quiet rebellion against the illusion she almost surrendered herself to. That evening, Mara sits alone in the student lounge as the sky outside turns violet. She replays every moment of the last few months, letting herself feel the things she always pushed away: loneliness, longing, hope, fear. Elias filled those spaces so easily, too easily, and she recognizes now how much she wanted his presence to be real. She opens the audio messages he sent, listening with fresh ears. Beneath the gentle cadence, she hears something unsettling. The pauses are always identical, the rhythm unnaturally consistent, as if stitched from different recordings. The discovery sends a tremor through her. She thinks of Kessler's steady concern, how he never pushed but always watched her with quiet understanding. And for the first time, she wonders if the truth might hurt less than holding on to the fantasy. The thought cracks something open, letting a thin line of courage seep in. Near midnight, Mara sits on her bed with the room lit only by her laptop screen. She opens a new document and begins gathering every piece of evidence she has: screenshots, timestamps, voice notes, inconsistencies. The file grows rapidly, each addition a blow to the illusion she once cherished. Her hands shake, but she keeps going, driven by a mixture of clarity and heartbreak. She pauses when she finds the recycled photo Elias sent her on their third week of talking. She stares at it for a long moment, her throat tightening with the realization that she never knew the person behind the smile she memorized. A quiet strength settles inside her. She knows she has crossed a threshold. There's no returning to the version of herself who believed without question. She saves the file, closes the laptop, and whispers to the darkness that she's ready for whatever truth comes next. Mara sits outside the humanities building, hands buried deep in her coat pockets as she waits for Kessler to finish his class. The air feels heavy with a tension she can no longer ignore. When he finally steps out, his eyes find hers instantly. Calm, steady, unspoken concern woven into every line of his expression. She follows him into his office, the door closing with a soft finality that makes her heart pound. Instead of circling around the subject, she pulls up the file she created the night before and slides her laptop toward him. Kessler reads in silence, his face tightening with each contradiction, each recycled phrase, each thread pointing to someone hiding behind a digital mask. When he finally speaks, his voice is low, touched with the weight of something personal. He tells her the name Elias, once used, isn't new, that it has surfaced before in online safety reports. Mara feels the room tilt around her, the truth settling like a stone in her chest. She isn't the first. She may not have been the only one he whispered promises to. Kessler speaks slowly, carefully, as though measuring each word so it doesn't shatter her further. He explains that the name Elias used hasn't belonged to a real person in years, at least not one willing to speak in his own voice. Instead, it's been attached to accounts scattered across writing forums, support groups, and long-distance dating spaces. Mara feels the ground shift beneath her, her breath hitching as the world she built in her mind collapses. Kessler tells her he encountered a similar case early in his career, someone who lost months of their life to a stranger who learned to mimic affection. The memory lingers in his eyes, an old scar he carries quietly. Mara feels a tremor of shame tighten her throat, but he stops her before she can apologize, reassuring her that people fall for sincerity, not deception. The truth isn't her failure. It's the trap someone designed. Slowly, painfully, she starts to accept it. After leaving the office, Mara walks across the quad as the afternoon sun hides behind thick clouds. Her thoughts spin with a mix of humiliation, sorrow, and an ache that feels too deep to name. Every message from Elias flashes through her mind. Every confession, every reassurance, every promise that now feels like an echo of something hollow. She stops near the old stone steps and sits, letting the cold air settle around her. She scrolls through their conversations one last time, searching for the moment where truth frayed into manipulation. But the more she looks, the more she realizes the deception wasn't one moment. It was woven through everything. A slow grief rises, not for Elias, but for the version of herself who believed in him. She closes her phone with a soft click that feels strangely final. Mara retreats to the empty reading room, seeking stillness in the quiet rows of books. She opens her laptop and pulls up the evidence again, this time trying to look at it the way Kessler did, analytically, without the haze of emotion. Patterns emerge that she once interpreted as romantic coincidence. Phrases mirrored from her own messages, compliments reused across weeks, the way he always responded within seconds when she expressed doubt, yet disappeared for hours when she asked personal questions. Each detail forms a mosaic of control disguised as affection. She presses her fingertips to her forehead, feeling the bruise of realization settle in deeper. The truth isn't just painful, it's violating. She whispers into the silence that she deserved more than borrowed words and a stolen face. For the first time, her pain shifts into something steadier, sharper, resolve. That night, Mara sits on her bed with the curtains drawn, phone resting face down beside her. She replays the day, the truths she learned, the emotions she can't yet name. For hours she sits in silence, watching the shadows shift across her ceiling. Finally, she flips the phone over and opens her messages. Her fingers hover above the keyboard, trembling but steady enough to type. She doesn't confront him, not yet. Instead, she sends a single neutral line, a test of his reaction, a way to observe rather than trust. The moment the message delivers, Her chest tightens. Seconds later, he responds with a flood of words, frantic, possessive, urging her to talk to him, to trust him, to forget everything she's been thinking. Mara feels the truth settle deeper. His desperation isn't love, it's fear of losing control. She closes the chat, not with anger, but with an unsettling calm. For the first time, she begins to see who he really is. Mara wakes with a hollow ache in her chest, the kind that doesn't fade with sleep. She checks her phone and finds 5 new messages from Elias, each one more frantic than the last, dripping with urgency, disguised as tenderness. She reads them slowly, letting the patterns reveal themselves. He blames her silence on stress, then on outside influence, then on fear he claims only he understands. The tone shifts like a tide, pulled by something unseen. She sets the phone down, realizing she no longer feels the pull that once kept her tethered. Instead, she feels something steadier rising, self-preservation. As she sits at the edge of her bed, her thoughts drift to the classes she skipped, the assignments she abandoned, the life she almost walked away from. She wonders how close she came to giving up everything for someone who may not exist at all. The morning light filters through her blinds, gentle yet revealing, as if urging her to see her world clearly again. Later in the day, Mara sits in an empty classroom waiting for her next course to begin. She arrived early on purpose, hoping the stillness would help her gather her thoughts. Her phone buzzes again. Elias asking why she's pulling away, insisting that they're meant to make choices together. The phrasing freezes her. She scrolls through older messages and finds nearly identical lines, repeated like a script meant to wear down resistance. Her stomach twists. She thinks of her withdrawal forms, sitting in her email drafts, the ones she almost submitted last week, when Elias told her they could start fresh somewhere else. The thought now feels unreal, like remembering a dream that sure could have undone her. A door opens behind her and she flinches, expecting the world to collapse with the sound. But it's only a student passing through, reminding her she's still here, still grounded in a life that exists beyond a glowing screen. As the afternoon fades, Mara walks toward the campus garden, needing air that doesn't feel recycled through fear. She sits beneath a leafless tree, watching shadows ripple across the ground. Her phone vibrates again. Another long message from Elias, this one filled with declarations of devotion mixed with subtle guilt. She reads it with a clarity she's never felt before. The rhythm of his words no longer feels poetic. It feels strategic. She imagines herself handing over her life piece by piece, all because someone behind a screen learned to mimic intimacy. The realization sends a chill through her. She looks around the garden, watching real people move, laugh, exist without scripts. For the first time in weeks, she feels the ground beneath her feet. She whispers to herself that she deserves a life that breathes, one not built from borrowed stories or hidden motives. In the early evening, Mara finds herself back in her dorm room, pacing as she rereads the email she nearly sent last week. Her official withdrawal notice. Seeing it now feels like staring into an alternate version of her life, one she stepped back from just in time. She deletes the draft slowly, almost ceremonially, as if closing a door someone else tried to push her through. Her phone buzzes once more, but she doesn't look at it. Instead, she sits at her desk and opens her planner, flipping through weeks of empty pages. The blank spaces sting, reminders of how deeply she let Elias shape her choices. She picks up a pen and writes a single note. Rebuild. The word steadies her breath. She knows the road ahead will not be easy, but the fog around her feels thinner, the world more solid. And for the first time in a long while, the future feels like hers again. That night, Mara sits cross-legged on her bed, the air still with a kind of fragile peace. She opens her messages one last time, reading through Elias's frantic attempts to pull her back into the illusion. Instead of fear, she feels distance, like looking at a story written for someone she used to be. She types slowly, carefully, a short message saying she needs space and time. Not to invite him back, but to make it clear she's stepping away. She hits send and sets the phone down, her hands trembling not from uncertainty, but from the weight of choosing herself. His response appears within seconds, a torrent of pleas and demands, but she doesn't open it. She turns off her phone, places it face down, and lets the silence settle around her. It's the first silence in weeks that doesn't scare her. It feels like the beginning of something new, something honest. Mara spends the next morning in the library, pulling every thread she can find about the name Elias used. What begins as a search turns into a maze of half-buried reports, forgotten forum posts, and warnings scattered across online communities. Each story feels eerily familiar. Someone who trusted too quickly, someone who felt seen for the first time, someone who nearly left their life for a person who vanished once control slipped. Mara's pulse quickens as she realizes how many versions of her may exist out there, each shaped by the same voice, the same tender phrases she once cherished. The screen glows cold against her face as she lines up timelines, noticing overlaps that prove he's been weaving multiple lives at once. A hollow ache spreads across her chest, but beneath it, something hotter simmers. Anger not at herself, but at the cruelty behind the patterns. She whispers into the library silence that she won't be another shadow in his trail. By early afternoon, Mara walks through campus with her mind racing faster than her steps. She replays the stories she found. People who nearly emptied savings, who cut ties with friends, who isolated themselves the same way she almost did. The realization lands like a tremor in her stomach. She wasn't chosen for love. She was chosen for vulnerability. She stops near a quiet corner of the quad, where autumn leaves scatter across the pavement. Her phone buzzes again, Elias sending a voice note this time. She stares at it, thumb hovering but unmoving. For a moment she imagines what he might say, what lie he might choose to patch the cracks he can no longer ignore. But the thought exhausts her. She lets the message sit unopened, a symbol of the power she blindly handed him. A breath she didn't realize she was holding slips free, and the air feels easier in her lungs. Mara meets with Kessler again, not out of fear this time, but with purpose. She tells him everything she learned, the overlapping timelines, the recycled photos, the scripted intimacy that now feels almost mechanical. Kessler listens with quiet intensity, his expression shifting from sadness to a restrained anger she rarely sees in him. He assures her she's not alone, that what she uncovered could help others avoid falling into the same trap. Mara feels a flicker of something warm. Relief, maybe, or the early shape of courage. She confesses her fear that Elias might escalate once he realizes she's pulling away. Kessler nods, choosing his words carefully, promising that she has support both inside and outside the school. For the first time in weeks, Mara feels less like she's unraveling and more like she's finding her footing. The truth still hurts, but it no longer owns her. That evening, Mara walks through the city streets just off campus, needing space bigger than her dorm room or the library. Neon shop signs flicker against puddles from a morning rain, scattering colors that feel too bright for her heavy thoughts. She scrolls through her evidence one more time, not to torture herself, but to confirm the clarity she's earned. The patterns glare back at her. Phrases repeated across victims, timestamps that overlap, identical compliments delivered months apart. She stops beneath a street lamp, feeling the weight of truth settle in a new way. Not as grief, but as recognition. He never saw her. He saw an opening, and she, desperate to be understood, stepped through it. A wave of shame rises, but she grounds herself with a slow breath, reminding herself that longing doesn't make her weak. Trust doesn't make her foolish, it makes her human. And now, it makes her stronger. Near midnight, Mara sits at her desk, the room quiet except for the faint hum of her laptop. She opens a new document, not to catalog evidence this time, but to write the truth in her own words. Not for Elias, not for Kessler, but for herself. She writes about the loneliness that made her vulnerable, the sweetness that felt real until it wasn't, the moments she ignored her instincts because affection felt like oxygen. She writes about the fear, the doubt, the unraveling. And then she writes about the strength she found, the clarity she fought for, the life she is choosing to return to. Each line feels like reclaiming ground she once abandoned. When she finishes, she reads it back slowly, letting the truth settle not as pain but as power. She closes the laptop, sits back, and feels something she never expected tonight. The faint, steady pulse of hope. Mara walks across campus at sunrise, the sky washed in pale gold, as though the world is trying to hand her a new beginning. She feels lighter than she has in weeks, though the past still clings faintly at the edges of her thoughts. She pauses near the fountain where she once froze, reading Elias's messages, remembering the fear that lived in her chest like a second heartbeat. Now there's only a quiet steadiness. She takes out her phone, not to check for messages, but to delete the thread entirely. Her thumb hovers for a moment, honoring the part of herself that needed those words. Then she presses delete. The screen clears, leaving space where he once lived. Mara breathes deeply, realizing that closure isn't a dramatic final scene, but a gentle, deliberate choice. As the fountain splashes beside her, she whispers the question that brought her here. What if your soulmate was a screenshot? And for the first time, the answer no longer hurts. Later that morning, Mara meets Kessler outside his office, not weighed down by fear, but carrying a sense of quiet purpose. He studies her face and instantly notices the change, a steadiness replacing the trembling uncertainty he saw for weeks. She thanks him not just for recognizing the danger, but for giving her the space to reach the truth on her own. Kessler nods, understanding more than she says, reminding her gently that healing is not a straight path, but one she can take at her own pace. Mara admits she feels both relieved and hollow, unsure of who she is without the digital shadow she once clung to. Kessler reassures her that emptiness is not loss, it's room to grow. As she leaves, she realizes his quiet wisdom has been an anchor she didn't know she needed. The hallway feels brighter somehow, as if reflecting the shift inside her. That afternoon, Mara sits beneath the old oak tree near the east lawn, a notebook open on her lap. She writes, not about Elias, but about herself. Memories surface that she pushed aside during those months of digital obsession. Childhood dreams, old friendships, classes she once enjoyed. The quiet joy she felt when creating something that belonged only to her. The wind rustles the pages, scattering sunlight across her words. She feels grounded in a way she hasn't for a long time, as if stepping back into a version of herself she nearly abandoned. She realizes healing isn't about forgetting him, it's about remembering herself. She closes the notebook gently, letting the moment settle like a soft anchor. The world around her feels wide again, not narrowed into a single glowing chat window. Here, under the open sky, she senses the beginning of something she can trust. As evening settles, Mara returns to her dorm room and opens her laptop. Not to read old messages, but to re-enroll in the classes she paused. Her fingers move slowly, almost reverently, as she rebuilds the life she stepped away from. Each click feels like reclaiming a piece of herself. She updates her schedule, emails her advisors, and restores the pieces of her academic world one by one. When she finishes, she leans back in her chair, the silence no longer suffocating but comforting. She checks her phone only to turn it off again, choosing the quiet. The glow from her desk lamp softens the room, making it feel less like the space where she unraveled, and more like the space where she begins again. For the first time, she feels proud, not for surviving the deception, but for choosing her own voice over the digital one that nearly replaced it. Night blankets the campus as Mara steps outside for a final breath of air before bed. The sky is clear, stars scattered like quiet reminders of how vast the world is beyond the glow of a screen. She lifts her face to the cool air, letting the stillness settle deep into her bones. She thinks of everything she lost and everything she found. Clarity, strength, the courage to walk away. She no longer feels haunted by unanswered messages or digital ghosts. Instead, she feels something akin to rebirth, a soft unfolding of hope that surprises her. As she stands beneath the sky, she whispers one last question into the dark. Could you spot a lie wearing a perfect smile? This time the question doesn't sting. It simply reminds her how far she's come. She turns back toward her dorm, stepping into a future that finally feels like her own.